Hey guys, this is David, and today we're going to learn how to set up i18next with React for localization. We're also going to use a platform/API called i18nexus, which is this really cool tool to basically manage all of our translations for us and even auto-translate them using Google Translate. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so all I've done so far is created a React app using create React app. If we go to the code, it's just a simple app component rendering this to the screen here. So first thing we're going to want to do is install the i18next packages that we're going to be using. So I'm going to close out of my server here and npm install. First thing we're going to install is i18next, which is the base i18next library. Then we're going to install React i18next. There we go, React i18next, which will give us all of our React hooks and React specific utilities. i18next HTTP backend. This will allow us to use Ajax to fetch our translations from i18nexus. We'll see how to do that in a minute here. And lastly, we'll install i18next browser language detector. This does exactly what you'd think it would do. It detects the language in the user's browser, so that way you can default to that language when they open your app. So let's go ahead and install those. Alright, so now that we've got those libraries installed, I'm going to go to i18nexus. So go to i18nexus.com, sign up for a free account, use Google or your email. I've already signed up, so I'm just going to go to the dashboard here. So after you sign up, you're going to see a screen like this. This is your i18nexus project. I named mine My Project, real original. And here we have the languages that we want our app to support. So the first tile here is your base language. So the base language is a language you're translating from, so it's your native language. Mine's English in this case. If you wanted to change it to something else, you click the pencil there and change it to whatever your native language is. And then here we can add as many languages as we want for our app to support. So I'm going to click Add Language, and let's support Spanish. So I'm going to type Spanish here and click that. There we go, we have a Spanish tile here, and we could add more languages if we'd like, but we're just going to stick with Spanish for now. Next, go to Open Project in the top right here. So this is the page where we're going to be adding the strings that we want to render in our app. So I'm going to click Add String, and you see we have three fields here. We have key, value, and details. The key is what you're going to be using to reference this string in your code. So the user is not going to see this, so call it whatever you want. I'm going to call this string welcome message, like that. You can format this key any way you'd like. It's just for reference in your code. The value here is what's going to be actually rendered to the user on the screen. So I'm going to call this, I'm just going to say welcome to my app, just like that. And the details, this is optional. If you ever get to the point where you're hiring translators to come in and edit your translations for you, you might want to give them a little more context into what exactly this means, if this were to be a vague value, but we'll skip that for now. We're not going to deal with that yet. So now that we have this string added, we can click this drop down arrow here and see all the languages that our app supports. So we only support Spanish right now, so it auto-translated this text here to Spanish. Really awesome. You can see here this little Google symbol that it was translated with Google Translate. And now that we have this string all set up and ready to go, let's go ahead and connect it to our app using i18next. So I'm going to go to the Export tab right down here. So here in the Export tab, you can see at the top we have the ability to version our strings. We're not going to go over that here, but if you want to use versioning in the future, it's good for caching and speeds up production environments. You could also use latest, which is your live strings. So when an edit is made in i18nexus to your strings, you see that live update in your app. So that's really good for development purposes. Down here we see we have two tabs, JavaScript and React. We're going to be using the React tab. And we're going to copy this code here and paste it into our app. I'll go over what all this means line by line in a second here. So if we go back to the code, I'm going to create a file in the source folder here called i18n.js, and I'll paste that there. So in this file, we're initializing i18next. Down here we have our configuration options, which you should read more about in the i18next documentation. I'll go over it really quickly here. We have our supported languages. These are the languages that we added in i18 Nexus. We have English, our base language, and Spanish, which is the language that we added. If a user were to come to your app with his browser set to French, for instance, it would check this array, say, oh, okay, you don't support French, and it would end up using the fallback language, which is set to English in our case, so that user would see your app in English. Down here we have the backend options, which we have access to because we're using the HTTP backend plugin. And this basically allows i18next to retrieve your translations from an API or server somewhere using Ajax. So we're telling i18next to use this URL here, which is the i18nexus API, and fetch our translations that way. Down here we have our namespaces. I recommend reading more about namespaces in the i18next docs, but for our case we're just using one namespace default. That's the name of the namespace. If you noticed in your i18nexus project, you have a namespace drop down up here to see what namespace that you're in. You have one that's named a default. You can edit that name if you really wanted to. You could add more namespaces. For most small to mid-sized apps, you really only need one namespace. And for default namespace, I'll let you read more about that in the i18next docs. But all you really need to know is this is the namespace that i18next assumes that your strings are located in. Alright, so now that we got this file set up, let's go ahead and import it into our project. I'm going to do that in the index.js file. So I'm going to import i18n.js. And one important thing to note here is we want to make sure that i18next is done fetching our strings prior to the app loading. We don't want the app to load and then our strings to flash in and create a weird user experience. So there's a couple ways to do that. One way to do that would be to wrap this in a function. This returns a promise and you could await that promise in your app component and then render the page. Another quick and easy way to do it is to use React's Suspense component. So I'm going to import Suspense from React. And up here, I'm going to wrap the app component in this Suspense component. And Suspense component takes a prop called fallback, which we will set to loading. So this suspense component will wait for this promise to resolve, the promise that's returned from here, and it will end up holding back loading this app component until all these strings are resolved. So let's go ahead and save that. All right, so let's go ahead and start up our server. So obviously there will be no changes here yet because we haven't edited our app.js file yet, but we're going to go ahead and do that now. All right, so the goal is going to be to replace this text here with our welcome message. So let's go to i18nexus, grab the key for our string. You can copy it with this little button here. Let's go back to our app component. And in order to render this string using a key, we're going to need to import a hook from React i18next called useTranslation. And useTranslation returns an object with a function called t that we can destructure out like this. And now we have access to this t function. And we're going to call this t function with our, let's delete that text, we're going to call the t function with our string key. So in our case, welcome message. And boom, now i18next will render this string inside of this p tag. So let's go back to the app and see if that worked. There it is, welcome to my app. So React i18next is rendering the English translation to our web page right now because my browser settings are set to English. If my browser settings were to be set to Spanish, it would use the Spanish translation. If you want to see what it's going to look like in Spanish, you don't have to go change all your browser settings to Spanish. One thing you can do with i18next is use a query param LNG for language, and you can actually put whatever language code you want to see it in. So I'm going to put LNG equals ES for Spanish. And boom, we have our Spanish translation now. So this is what a user would see if they logged into your app or opened your app with a browser set to Spanish. So really cool, really powerful, really quick results. It's really nice to be able to see your app in other languages prior to going out and hiring professional translators. So you can keep doing this by adding more and more languages to i18nexus, and you can really have as many languages as you want. So let's see how we would do that. How would we add another language to our app? It's very simple with i18nexus. All you have to do is go back to the dashboard over here. And now we're back to our languages tab. Simply go to add language. Let's try adding German. And boom, we have German added to our project. And all of our strings, we only have one right now, but all of our strings are translated automatically to German with Google Translate, and we now have this translation available. Before we go and try checking if it works in the browser, one thing we have to be sure to do is go to our i18n.js file into our i18next configuration and make sure to let it know that we are now supporting German as well. And the language code for German is DE. So now i18next knows that we support German. Let's go back to our app and try typing in DE in the query param. And there it is. Now we have our app in German. So as you can see, integrating i18next and i18nexus into your React project is really quick and easy, and it's very powerful and a very scalable way to handle your localization. If we go back to our i18nexus project, we can actually see there's a lot more features here that we haven't gone over yet that we can go over in a future tutorial. But basically you can add more members, you can add translators to actually confirm and edit the translations. We can get a little hint of that if you go to your project strings and you click over here in translator view. So if you invited someone to translate Spanish, they would see this view where they can edit and confirm the translations. So i18nexus is a very good, clean, simple translation management system as well. So before we go, one last thing I want to gloss over in i18nexus is versioning. So if you click this button here for exports and versions, you'll see the ability to create a new version using this button here. So what's the difference between using latest and using a version? Well, using latest is recommended for development environments where basically anytime a string is edited in i18nexus, that string is automatically edited in your app as well because you're grabbing the live strings using the i18nexus API endpoint right here. With versioning, you're accessing a saved and cached version on the i18nexus CDN, so it's much faster for production environments. And when you use versioning, you're also able to take advantage of browser caching and storing the strings in the user's local storage so that they don't have to go fetch your strings every single time they load your app, because these string files can get quite large and it's much more optimized to let them store those strings in their browser. So if you want to do that, you just click create a new version. I've already done that here, so I've already created a version 1. So down here you can see that the code snippet is a little bit different for production environments with versioning. You'll see we use chained backend and we also use local storage backend. And when we use local storage backend, we're basically just saying, hey, store this version of the strings in the user's browser until another version is available. So it's a much more optimized way to do things, much faster for production, and I highly recommend it. So I hope this tutorial was useful for you guys, and we will see you next time.